So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club and my firm, Brimacombe Capital, welcome to Club E. Today's session, Centerra, a journey through venture funding. I know that there's kind of been two parts to the marketing. First part out was Eric Teipela, the CEO. The second wave of marketing, I had the two head engineers, which I have here today. And in some respects, this is an upgrade in that they're the ones who actually have to do the work. So you're going to probably get even more inside baseball with our conversation with Reed and Todd. As a prelude to this discussion, Todd Colton to my immediate left actually, and I don't even know if you remember this, but you called me about 4 years ago, and Todd left a message, and I was at one of these events, and I got out of the Club E event and I had all these messages. I'm like, skip, save, delete, skip. Oh, this one's good. And I listened to it in the ramp, and I knew like instantaneously that this was a story that I was super excited about. So I actually called Todd from the ramp going around in the circle, and about 4 years ago I had my first conversation with Todd and have been helping the company along their journey ever since. The thing that kind of jumped out to me right then was that the drones to me seemed like an interesting category, and this again was 4 years ago, so that was pretty early in what was going on. They were domain experts, and so even though the industry itself was relatively new, their engineering team was averaging over 10 years industry experience because of their backgrounds, which we'll get to in a little bit. And so they had deep domain expertise in an industry that was really just starting to happen. So the engineering team intrigued me and got me excited about what they were doing. And even on top of that, they had some initial customers. So the story for me goes back 4 years, and it was just one of those things that I knew literally from the voicemail that Todd left that I was excited about the story. Now, 4 years later, they've raised somewhere around $25 million in capital, and revenue's ramping. And again, the guys who really make it work are sitting here today, so it's a pleasure and an honor to have them here. So before we get to our panel, I want to make a couple of announcements. Thank you to our sponsors, Schwegman, Lundberg, Woosner, an intellectual property law firm. Dave DiZarilla is in the back somewhere over here. Thanks, Dave, for your support. Olson Thielen CPAs is a full-service accounting firm, and off of his retirement couch and easy chairs, Mike Bromelkamp off to my right. Irish Titan is a web development and e-commerce company. Darren Lynch is right here in the middle of the room. Megan's off to my left. Thank you for your support. McLeod and Company is a holistic marketing agency. Far back is Samantha, and McLeod actually has been working with Centerra for about 2.5 years, and so they've been supporting them. And I should have said also Irish Titan has done work with McLeod and has been supporting them, and interestingly enough, so has Olson Thielen. Highland Bank is a local $500+ million community bank. They're one of our sponsors. And then last but not least is the Network Connect, a catalytic gateway for connecting investors, companies, and service providers. Dick Summerstep, my partner in that business, is in the back. Welcome, Dick. Remind everybody that you can RSVP online through Brown Paper Tickets, always the first Thursday of the month. clube.com, you can sign up for the newsletter as well as sign up for the business library and directory. There's a LinkedIn group, meetup group. Both of those have a couple thousand people each, so that's a good way to stay connected with our organization. And then there's an email list that I can get you on if you don't feel like doing it yourself off of the clube.com website. Minneapolis Club has been a supporter of this since day one. Anybody interested in learning more about the Minneapolis Club, let me know. And then Lessons from the Garage is a effort on behalf of the Network Connect. Again, Dick Summerstep and I do that. It's a series of video podcasts. We have over 200 titles so far, probably have another 100 within the next 6-9 months. It's kind of like Netflix for business owners, so anybody who would like to learn a little bit more about the Lessons from the Garage video library, seek out Dick Summerstep or myself. Business of the month. There's a fishbowl out in the back. You can drop your card in there. McLeod and Company supports Club E by pushing out into the Club E marketing channels a business each month. And Protocol 46 was the winner last month. John Pittenwer, John's over here to my immediate right. John's put some materials out on the tables. So they are the Club E Business of the Month. They're a full-service cybersecurity firm serving small and mid-sized businesses. They specialize in highly regulated industries, but have a full suite of solutions. So if you have any questions, seek out John on that, or again, they have materials out on the tables. Lastly, a couple of events coming up next week is Club E St. Paul. Let's see, Chum, where are you? Chum, over here. Chum runs Club E St. Paul, and Neely Teminga is going to be speaking about the economic environment that we're in and what 2019 looks like. And if you have never heard Neely speak, this is a must-see. Do not miss it. She's a wonderful speaker, used to be a retail analyst at Piper, super smart, comes up with cool insights around consumer behavior and so forth. She has spoken here as well as St. Paul in the past. Very good. That's December 12th in St. Paul if you want to go to that. January 10th back here in Minneapolis, Club E-commerce that day, buying and selling things online. Darren Lynch of Irish Titan is going to be one of two folks that will be doing some kind of fireside chat stuff like this, along with Will Turnlin. So that's January 10th, and then January 29th, Club E and Upsize are back here talking about growing revenue and increasing profits. Okay, so with all that stuff gets us to our panel. To my immediate left is Todd Colton, Chief Aerospace Engineer, and if you think of the flying aspect of what Centerra does, Todd makes that happen. So drones and Todd, they go together, and Todd is the Chief Engineer on that side of things. Reed Palumbo, Director of Software Products. Reed makes sure that we have all the appropriate software and can conduct all the analytics that we try to do. So we have the flying here, the software over there. So like I said, while Eric Typolo was originally supposed to be here in some respects, you get the real inside baseball being here with these two guys. So thank you for joining us. I have some questions here. I'm going to kind of work my way through these. With that said, this is supposed to be a interactive process, so if somebody has a question, raise your hand, and I'll either try to get to it or I'll tell you we got it coming up or what have you. So if somebody wants to ask a question, please do. Originally, with Eric being here, probably would have been the funding top of the story with the company second. Today we're going to kind of flip that around. We're going to do the story first and kind of the funding second. I was helping Eric all along with that from day one, so I will talk to that a little bit and can answer questions. With that said, why don't you each give us a little bit of your own backgrounds. Todd, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about the history of what you've done and how you ended up at Centerra.
Sure. Sounds good. Is this on? This is on. There we go. Got it. Yeah, and thanks, Rick, for having us out. I'll just start with that. I was here at an event 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was
right?
January of 2015.
I was trying to remember the date, so it's almost 4 years. Real close. And that anecdote you said about the phone call on the ramp, I don't know if you actually know the full story here, but that was literally day 2 of the genesis of what was to become Centerra. We hadn't even figured out a name yet or anything.
Yeah.
Day 1 had been the day before on the patio at Cowboy Jack's with the cheapest pitcher of beer that we could find with a group of us that said, well, what should we do next? Because we were given the opportunity to go out and start something on our own. And day 2 was we got together in a conference room somewhere and started calling friends and colleagues and said, we're thinking about starting a company. What should we do? I called a friend of mine. He said, I know this guy, Rick Brimacombe. You should call him. We called, left a message, and that was it. So
well, the story just got better. I didn't even know that part of it. So day 2. So my story in the future even got better. So thanks for sharing that.
That's great. And so sort of my background, as Rick said, I run the small engineering team at the company. Of aerospace engineers and developers where some of the drone products we work on, we actually design and build the aircraft ourselves, and others we take aircraft little quadcopter aircraft or the drones that you'd see on the news a lot. We'll buy off the shelf, but then we'll stick our cameras and sensors on board. So, for example, one of the projects we're working on now is to take some really accurate GPS systems that can tie into the same GPS systems that the tractors drive on farms. We're putting that same thing on the drones so they can sort of operate together. So that's some of the work that we're doing. My background is aerospace engineering. I went to the University of Minnesota in the kind of mid to late 90s. Got out. That was the sort of the peak of the dot-com times, for people that remember that. And all my friends were actually dropping out of school and saying, I don't need an actual degree. I can just go make tons of money doing this new web page thing and whatever else people were doing. And they were all buying nice cars and all the rest. And I said, no, I'm going to do this aerospace engineering. So I stuck with it, got out, and there was no jobs to be had. So I went and got a job in the aerospace industry, or outside the aerospace industry, kind of doing dot-com stuff. But I had a friend of mine who worked at Lockheed Martin, which was a big giant aerospace company that used to be in town. And I kept saying, hey, get me a job there, get me a job there. He said, I'm not sure if you really want here. It might not be as cool as you think it is. No, really, I want to work on airplanes and that type of stuff. So finally, he kind of got me in, and I got a job there. And my first job out of college was we're going to take all the ashtrays that are on these old airplanes and get rid of them because you can't smoke anymore. So you're going to put what we call blanking plates, which is a square of aluminum with 4 holes in it. And that's what you're going to work on for the next 6 months. And so that was kind of, it's called putting in your time. But when I was a young engineer right out of school, I didn't appreciate that all that much. So I wanted to work on something more interesting. I kept asking around. I heard of my boss and some others said, well, there's this crazy old kooky guy in the corner who's working on these things called UAVs, or unmanned aerial vehicles. He's kind of crazy and kind of hard to work with, and nobody likes to work with him. But if you really want to work on this stuff, maybe go see if he can, he's got something for you. So I went, it took a couple weeks. I gathered up myself. I went and talked to him. I said, hey, I hear you're working on some UAVs. And he turned around, looked at me up and down, kind of said, I'm busy, come back later. And so, so that was it. Kind of gathered up my courage. 2 weeks later, went back to him again and said, hey, I was told you're working on some stuff and I'd be interested in helping. He looked at me again, kind of remembered me from 2 weeks ago and said, all right, you can work on the stuff, but it's going to be during your lunch hours and after 5 o'clock and on Saturdays. And I said, sign me up, because I didn't have anything else going on. I was a young engineer, and that kind of got me into the industry, and it's really been a passion ever since, like working on these robotic airplanes that fly around and do useful jobs. And so it's been I've been doing it for 18 years now, which makes me kind of an old man in the drone industry, but that's how I got started, and that's the genesis. And then I was part of one of the original group of people that actually started Centera when we were kind of getting together and starting a new company. Worked with Reed actually back at those Lockheed Martin days, so that's where we met originally. But that's sort of my background and story.
Right, and then that was, again, one of the things I saw, that you folks had been doing these for a long time. So even
Right.
though commercially the market was just happening at Lockheed Martin, they had been working together and working on this stuff for a long, long time. So thank you for being here again, and thanks for the good comments. And I didn't know that part about the story as it relates to me. So now my story, like I said, just got better. All right, so Reed, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. So at Centera, my job is to deliver software products. So anything that a consumer can touch, use with their hands, that's us. So that is rolled up under 4 basic things. It's a desktop application that does all the data processing for the images that come off of the drones. It's the mobile app to fly itself, to fly the drone itself, which is it's in the App Store. You should go download it. They'll boost our monthly statistics. And then it's an API and a web app too. So we really span the gamut when it comes to delivering these products, but the goal is to make drone data accessible to anyone. It's been so long in the research world that we are now beginning to commercialize it. And along with that comes using some of those more commercial tools like an iOS app and a web page that you can just visit and see all your drone data, manipulate it and save it and all that other stuff. So I came to this in a little bit of a different path. I joined Lockheed Martin in 2004 with Todd, and I didn't actually know some of that early stuff, but I think I'm standing on your shoulders in a way, because I joined in 2004 and there was a drone program that was happening on nights and weekends, and so I did the same deal, young engineer, nothing else to do, no kids, so, hopped on that, and we sort of, as a team, parlayed that into an actual program that's the roots of all this, which is pretty cool. So Lockheed Martin, if you're not familiar with it, they exited Minnesota in 2011. That was kind of I think that's the genesis of the startup story. That was my time for a different experience. So I had been doing the hardcore engineering thing for a while, but I was always attracted to the more business side, the more like where technology and the people meet. And so I went to Target, and I did a 4-year tour of Target doing product management and product development there in like own brand goods. Super informative experience. It informs everything I do at Centera now, delivering software products. So I'm very thankful for that time there. But yeah, that's kind of my journey.
Great, thank you. So you both were in engineering. The University of Minnesota, you both went to the University of Minnesota.
Yep.
Are they nationally recognized in their aerospace and aeronautical engineering?
Sure, yeah. The aerospace engineering department at the U it's maybe not all that well known within the state, but within the aerospace industry, it's pretty well recognized, and it's got a long history. It goes back even, if you tour the halls there, you'll see pictures of old parachutes. So they were really actively actively engaged in the development of parachute technology and parachute aerodynamics in like the 20s and 30s, kind of leading, back in the 100 years ago, really, right? And then kind of since then, they evolved into a real powerhouse in terms of dynamics and controls. And so what you think of in terms of airplane autopilots. So a lot of, most of you probably have a sense of if you travel from the airport and fly somewhere, the aircraft is flying on autopilot almost the entire time. And in fact, a lot of them fly for completely the entire time, all the way from takeoff to landing, and the pilot is just there making sure everything's set up right and monitoring everything and changing the settings. But it's all on autopilot, and a lot of that technology came out of University of Minnesota over the decades. And a lot of it has to do with real close ties with companies like Honeywell and others that are in town here. So it was kind of a natural thing. That's really what makes drones fly, is drones are taking all that technology, shrinking it down, sticking it on a small little electric airplane, but it's got the same sophistication that the big 747 or 757 or whatever it is you're flying now has got in it.
Great.
There was a lot of focus on drone programs too. I graduated in 2005, and even my first year there, I remember there was drone teams competing in these national competitions, and they've been a leader in the space, just in general as well, in addition to some of those other things.
Yeah.
Great. And then just going back kind of to your childhood, told you a story about the red jacket here. Were the two of you interested in flying and flight as kids? Did you have hobbies? Were you doing stuff like that?
I was the kid, and now my kid is the kid who's got the Gullos Balsa red propeller things. Remember those? They hurt your fingers when you let them go. I was doing that, and then graduated to those even more fragile, like the balsa and tissue ones covered in dope that would make your head swim, like that kind of stuff. I loved that. And then got into radio control, and so I was doing helicopters and all this other stuff. And that is what pushed me into an aerospace career. It was my hobby interest. And actually, I remember the first time I ever saw Todd, I was flying a radio control helicopter. And I was like, who's that guy staring at me? And it turned out to be Todd. So.
That's funny. I actually, part of what I do a lot is I go back to the University of Minnesota and I'll sponsor or mentor sort of design projects at the aerospace department. So I kind of try to keep ties. So every year I'm back there and I'll give a guest lecture and I kind of tell my story, coming out, graduating from the department, and then my career going forward. And somebody asked a couple years ago, said the similar question, like, what's the genesis, or how did you decide to get into it? And it struck me because at the time I had a 5-year-old son, and I had this flashback, this really vivid flashback to when I was 5, and my father took me to Harmar Mall in Roseville, and there was an F-15 parked in the parking lot that the Air Force was taking on tour. And he hauled me up this thing. I'd never seen one of these before or whatever. And they put me in the cockpit, right? The cockpit was open. Adults couldn't get in there, but they were letting kids to go in, right? And so there it was. And that was like probably the thing, like the moment that sort of set me on the path. Obviously, my father grew up in the 60s and space program and Apollo and all the rest. He was very into the thing. And so he sort of imbued that, I think, throughout my childhood into me. And so it just sort of, I didn't really realize it, but, kind of, that's how I ended up kind of getting there. So,
Neat,
yeah.
neat. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. So how did the two of you get connected with Eric Teipel at Lockheed Martin?
So he took over. So some of the backstory. So Todd Nights and Weekends thing turned into a $1 million internal research project that ultimately paved the way for us to receive a program from a different Lockheed Martin site called FPAS, which was a small bungee-launched, high failure rate but cheap program that was being sold to the Air Force. So we evolved that into a program that we sold to the British Army. And I'd say our current, the technical staff at the time had probably taken it as far as they could and needed some fresh technical leadership. And Eric was rotating off of his Predator work. Eric was a pretty key guy in some of the Predator data fusion stuff that was happening.
Tell everybody what the Predator is.
Predator is it's, how do I describe Predator? It's a huge unmanned aerial vehicle. Now, anytime you hear about drone strikes, like that kind of stuff, that is generally a Predator carrying some scary missile. So, but Eric was rotating off of that and saw a chance to take this program over, and he came in and started building this team to be way more technically focused, I think, than we had been prior. And that ultimately resulted in a program that by its end in 2011, when Lockheed decided to exit Minnesota, I was doing, I think, roughly about $30 million a year in new products, in supporting legacy products. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah, I just would add to that. So Reed and I were both working on this program at the time, and Eric was kind of moved in to be the new technical engineering lead. And it was really, neither of us had worked with him before, but he came in and had a totally different attitude, a very can-do attitude, a very, we can do this, we can and will work within the system and the bureaucracy to find funding and push technology along and develop it. And one of the very first things he did was take some of the, at the time, us lower-level engineers, brought us down into the second-level sub-basement of Lockheed Martin, into a room that had like double walls and the whole thing, and sat us down and said, all right, your boss is in here and your boss's boss is in here. Let's talk about what you guys think we should do to this product line, and what technology should we focus on, and how can we make products that our customers are going to want to buy. So he kind of went all the way to the lowest level and said, let's figure it out. And so we told him what we thought it was, and he said, okay, let's go do that. And from there, the way his leadership style is very much it's very technical focused. He's a very technical guy, but he said, not only is it your responsibility to come up with the technical solution, but you have to justify it with the business case. It's your responsibility as the technical expert to also know what the business case is and what justifies it. And so everything's going to be driven based on, is this justifiable? Does this pay for itself in dollars and cents? And, so that, I mean, really, he built this team, this engineering team, and we've been sticking together through, a bunch of different incarnations, and some people leave and then they come back and the whole thing. But it's all based on this sort of mix of running the business side and the technical side kind of as a joined enterprise. So.
And then when the concept or the idea about Centera, although the name Centera didn't come for several months, what about that story intrigued you enough to want to join the company?
So I was working at Target at the time, and Target was an awesome experience, and it just wasn't technical, right? I mean, we were working on own brand housewares, we were working on food products, we were doing all this really cool stuff, and but I'm the kid with the red propeller, like that's me. So I wanted to find a job where I could still do the things I love doing at Target, which is that intersection of people and product, but find a place to do that technology-wise. And then, of course, to work again with some people who had such deep trust and teamwork already established. Like it was a no-brainer to leave Target and jump to Centera for me.
So if we kind of look at the history of when we were working on developing this technology at Lockheed Martin, we were working at the big, giant mega corporation, the behemoth, and we couldn't do all the stuff internally ourselves. And so as a company, we went up and propped up these small little startup companies to help develop some of the electronics and help manufacture these small, cheap little airplanes because Lockheed could never afford to do it and make it affordable. So we helped prop up and support and fund all these little startup companies, and the engineering team, we saw them be successful and the owners make a lot of money and all this other stuff, and we kept telling ourselves, we're on the wrong side of this fence, so, but we were young and not as experienced, and to be honest, we had very comfortable jobs at a big company and with good benefits, so, we were on the side of the fence that we were on. But there was a couple different instances where we said, hey, should we try to do something? Should we try to do our own company? And there was a couple half attempts and it didn't work out, but then with Centera 4 years ago, we were given an opportunity where, all right, now's the time, and if we're going to do it, it better be now. And so Reed and there was a few other people that had sort of gone off in other places, and we said, let's get the band back together, let's start making calls. And Reed didn't come right away, but after it wasn't long when
It was a couple months, right? It was a couple months,
Yeah,
right?
I joined in I think it was April 15th, and I
Yeah.
think the company was founded in.
wasn't that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, founded in December, I think.
That's,
so.
well, yeah, that's pretty much right away.
Yeah, that's close. But yeah, I'm not a founder, but
That's kind of where it was. I mean, that was the reason why we started it, because it was going to be now or never.
Okay, so as you kind of fast forward from there to now, how have things progressed from your perspective? Obviously, there's a lot of success, but just kind of more globally, how would you assess things and how they've progressed?
you want to start?
Sure. The thing I keep that keeps kind of is astonishing to me anyway, and I'm not sure if this is common with a lot of startup companies or not, but we had a kind of a nice core of people that had a lot of experience, and then we very kind of methodically or steadily hired about one person a month, and we just slowly grew, and we're over 40 people now, I think. Our very first actually revenue contract was a small business contract that we had through University of Minnesota with some ties we had. It was a little research contract, and the requirements for that was you had to be a small company in Minnesota under 40 people. And so it just sort of dawned on me recently that we now would not even qualify for where we originally started from for the first thing. And that was a little research thing that had to do with, funny enough, developing autopilots that would fly drones over farm fields. So,
For me, progress, I think the best way to measure it is through focus. Like when, we're a team of engineers, and brag on us for a minute, like he's a smart dude. Like he can do a lot of cool things, but what should he do? And figuring out, bridging that of, okay, the world's your oyster. You have some money and you have a really smart team of people. Should we do pet fitness trackers? No, probably shouldn't do that. So what should we do? Because we can do anything. And, I think we wandered a little bit to find the right path of where our technologies and skills were most applicable. And so now we have very clear focus. We have clear vision, clear goals. We have but that took time, and that's a very good indicator for me of progress. Is I think we know where we are. I think we know what we're good at, and I think we know where we're headed.
And then if you look back over these couple of years, what would you say have worked the best? If you were grading yourself and say, oh, we got an A for doing blank.
Hiring, I think. I'm going to go back to this. We have, I think we've done overall, every company has had ups and downs, right? But I think overall, I think we've done a really good job hiring the people that are in this company. Some, have the legacy background, some don't. But we have a very technically sharp group of people who are very committed to this organization. And that didn't happen accidentally. That happened through people just finding good people and through referrals and networking and stuff like that. And so I think we've done overall a really good job of hiring, and I think a lot of that is due, a lot of the success that we've had is due to that. Just sort of a side note, but like, you know, coming from Lockheed Martin and into Target, and then to Centera, this was my first kind of small company experience, and I could have never imagined the impact of talent on an organization. You don't get exposed to that in a big company where it's like, well, you can absorb, you know, a couple 1Xers, but like one 10Xer can kind of carry the team, right? Like, there's that shows up so clearly in a small organization when no one is when you're not a 10Xer, you know what I mean? So that was such a huge learning for me, just in this transformation, and I also think it's one of the things that we've done well.
Todd?
That's really interesting, I think. My kind of thought on this was, one thing that also strikes me is where we've been very successful is on the product development side, we've really focused on value. We've really focused on developing a solution that is a drone, it has some specialized cameras on board and a software solution, and it's a whole package. And if you look at it and you compare what the products that Centera is making with some of our competition, any reasonable person who would do some research would come to the same, I should say, the vast majority of people that would do the research would come to the conclusion that the Centera product is the best value. And it really is in terms of price and what you get for the money. And I think that somewhat goes back to sort of our CEO, Eric's leadership style and kind of his idea that we have to drive to something that makes sense financially, not only for our company, but for our customers and everything else. So we've been very successful, and we developed a little tiny camera that looks at plant health. It looks in different wavelengths of light that the human eye can't see, but you can measure plant health that way. And we miniaturized it and made it small enough and affordable enough, yet still with enough like technical performance that it gets the job done, but we're able to make it cheaper than the other guys. And then we've taken that, because it's small and lightweight, we're able to stick it on a smaller and lighter weight drone. And there happens to be some really popular, easy to fly drones out there that are in this size category. So we kind of got on board with the easiest to fly, most reliable, best value for the money drone. And then we early on we said we were trying to figure out software, and Reed leads the software team, but how do you price software? How do you charge money for software? That's everybody's problem. So we had lots of ideas early on, but eventually it evolved into, you know what, the software is going to get packaged with the system. It's just with the hardware, kind of the Apple model to some degree, and then you will make money on software recurring afterwards on the actual services that you're providing, and that's the model that we've come to. So the barrier to entry is low to get on board. We provide a very good value, and then it, there's kind of a recurring revenue stream as the customers use our product, and that's been, if I look at our little niche in the industry and what our competition is doing compared to what we're doing, I think we've found a better formula for that. So.
Yeah, can I build on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good point, because that really does inform every piece of our product portfolio. And you can, if you're going to go if you're going to do what we do, which is fly a drone, take pictures, make a map, see healthy spots, bad spots, count weeds, find plants, stuff like that. You'd probably need to visit 4 or 5 different vendors. Someone to buy the drone, someone to buy the camera, someone to buy it. But our background from Lockheed Martin is a systems integrator. Like, that's what they do. And you can see that footprint all the way into what we do now, which is we provide an end-to-end solution. So we have software that works with the hardware, that works with the software products that use make maps and lets you share them. And our competition would require that you visit 4 different people, and that is, I would argue, not a product-focused way of achieving this, but we are different in that, which I think is really cool and something we do well.
Great, thank you. And on the letter grade thing, say what part of the business maybe you wouldn't get an A, an area you could improve, maybe something that surprised you along the way. Not that you have to beat yourself up too much, but just something that kind of a learning that you could have done better or that you've learned looking backward.
You probably got lots.
Days.
I'll just jump in here.
Short version.
Yeah. There's tons of lessons you learn along the way, right? And I would say that that one of our big advantages was starting with a group of people that had worked together for a long time, and we had a common culture and a common background. But that's also something that you can have some headwinds that you fight against. And as we've grown as a company and hired more people, trying to integrate those people into the existing company culture that started, or evolving the company culture that was there to accommodate the fresh blood, for example, that's something that we continue to try to learn how to do. I was struck by, actually, just Tuesday, 2 days ago, we have our weekly meetings on Tuesday. Reed actually started it and runs the weekly meeting, and it's evolved, as the company's evolved, that meeting has sort of evolved into different sort of flavors and forms, but we can't fit everybody in the conference room anymore, so it spills out, and that happens every week now, and when people are filing out after the half-hour status meeting and everything, there's just a lot of conversation and there's a lot going on, and everybody's sort of, it's the energy and the liveliness has really started to take a new form. And that's sort of been something that I feel like along the way we sometimes struggled with, but now we're sort of learning how to grow up as a company. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we had our sort of culture built in because we'd already formed our culture 10 years ago. And as we hire, yeah, we're going to have to get better at that. I was going to revisit this idea of focus when I think about things we could have done better, especially when you go to the point of investing time, energy, dollars into designing, manufacturing products. And that includes writing software. It's no different. I think back, on day 7, it was like, we need a website. Build a website. I was like, all right, learn how to do it. It is, not a very good one, but like it had 3 columns on it. It was like, we do agriculture, we do military and police, I think we called it public safety, and then
Public safety and security.
public safety and security, and then we had infrastructure like oil and gas and cell towers, and like we're going to apply our technologies to all of these. And if you go to our website now, there's one, and it's agriculture. And so, early on, like trying to develop solutions that were simultaneously applicable to 3 different markets, caused us to release 2 different software products, and then, you start supporting, anyway, like, focus is, I think, one of the things looking back, like, we probably could have saved some time. If we did this again, we would be talking about a really clear mission, like, what problem are we going to solve here? I think we'd probably have that conversation a little sooner.
Well, I'll come to you in just a moment. Full disclosure, that was a conversation that we were having, and I, grading myself, could have done a better job of saying, narrow it down. It was something that we talked about, but just maybe didn't tighten the screws quite tight enough. Ned?
Well, actually, it's great, because my real question is around focus. Of course, our solution can do everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so how do you really identify, is it, revenue-based focus when you're looking at your company and really launching your product? Or is it more that, like, how did you find your focus? Because we think we can, your focus can either be really broad, right?
Yep.
Which isn't really focused, or it can be so narrowly focused that you're not going to be able to scale and actually make a business.
Sure, so if you didn't hear it in the back, the question was about focus. How did we find the focus? What were the kind of the trigger points to get us to where we landed?
I think my perspective on that would be our customers, I think, helped us, like the demand side. We were lucky enough to live long enough to find it. But, we had customers saying, I need this feature, I want this feature, like, bring this. And so we had customers coming to us in the agriculture side, and we were going to customers on these other sides, like trying to sell, where we had customers coming, I need more, I need this feature, I want more fields, more acres, more batteries. And like resources just started to gravitate. And there came a time when like we can no longer support these with the current resource levels. And we made the decision to exit a product line out of it too. Like I said, we had that split software product that we just walked away from because we just said, we can't support this as a company, and we need to focus on where we have this traction that's being demonstrated by like our customers and our user base.
Let me just add on that really quick. I'll just say early on, We had revenue from day one. A lot of startup companies don't, and it wasn't a ton of revenue, but we had revenue, and it's been growing slowly but steadily ever since. But in the early days, in the first year or two, the agriculture piece of that revenue wasn't dominant. It was small, and we had small revenue here and small revenue here. So we were trying to cobble together lots of different things just to build revenue and just to do something, bring some money in the door, and so it's a balance, and it's something, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but that was part of the reason why we were doing it in many different areas, because we knew we could, and we could get some revenue in these areas, and we were getting revenue in these areas, but really the long term, as time progressed, after about 2 years or so, agriculture it sort of tipped over. Now it's more than 50% of our business. And then a year ago, we're like, ooh, it's like 80% of our business, and maybe, okay, yep, this is like for real now. This is what we're doing. So
we found product market fit in agriculture, and I'd say we didn't find it in these others. And when we were lucky enough to live long enough to have that sort of like 3-prong approach, and then find the one that worked. So there's a little bit of luck in that, a little bit of grace, that goes along with that too.
And I would also add there was a maturity of the ag market because they started a little earlier because of regulations. Drone goes down in a cornfield, nobody cares. A drone crashes here and somebody gets injured, it's a different story. So some of that was that the market was ready and got going a little sooner. All right, so let's talk for a minute about the fundraising. I wanted to say just a couple of quick points on that. Originally, when Eric Teipla and the other co-founders were out talking to the initial investors, we were talking to angels, we were talking to strategics, and we were talking to venture firms. At that time, there still was a heavy dose of risk associated with it, so most of the venture firms said, come back later. And fortunately for the company, they landed on a strategic investor who was a combo, got the industry so they could, move, but then also had deep enough pockets that we weren't trying to collect $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 checks. So it was kind of a lucky break to find the strategic investor, which actually goes back to the prior work that the company had done in the industry, how all this kind of built on one another, and so layer upon layer. So the strategic investor invested. And then for the last fundraising effort and round that we did, the dollar amount was big enough that we thought it was going to be complicated enough and time-consuming enough that we needed some help. So we got an investment banker involved and supported that investment banker through a process, and there were a few starts and stops on the front end of that process. Some of it was us learning about the industry and the focus, and that, the saying is taking it takes twice as much time and costs twice as much. Well, that fundraising did too. Despite the great job the company was doing, progress they're making, revenues were going up, and it still took a long time. And so strategic investor, investment banker, and then the investment banker and myself brought the company back to the venture capital world. They kind of assessed the progress we had been making. Some of those people had seen us before, and so after overnight success, after about 18 months of grinding it out, it showed up that we had raised some money. So that's a backstory. Happy to talk to anybody here if you wanted more detail on that, because I was helping Eric through that. But for today's conversation, that was kind of the high-level overview that I wanted to share with everybody on the fundraising. So, guys, the venture community, strategic community first, and then venture community have invested in the company. So obviously, they're excited about the company's prospects. What gets you most excited about Centerra as you look forward for the company?
For me, this comes back to some of the more prescriptive products that we'll be delivering in the next coming years. So just a quick step back, one of our primary products is called NDVI. It's a measure of crop and plant health, and can cue you to say, hey, this block of plants is not doing as well as the neighboring block of plants, for example. But we still don't know why. We don't know if that's if that has disease, if that has nitrogen deficiency, if it's being overtaken by weeds, et cetera. We are now moving, though, towards a more sophisticated set of analytics. So, for example, like I could tell you from the air that this plant, this individual corn plant is showing signs of nitrogen deficiency. Things like that will help move us into more prescriptive actions. So you could say now from one flight, I can tell you exactly what you need to do instead of telling you, basically just flagging an area of crop health. So we're going to be employing a bunch of machine learning techniques. We're going to be doing that stuff at the field edge, in real time. That is the stuff that gets me the most excited, to do that in this year and then in the following year. And then the other piece of this is I'm most excited to bring this stuff out of the lab. I think a lot of companies maybe can talk about, using ML and things like that on the bench, and that's cool, but we're going to be doing it in, middle of Iowa, at the field edge. That is something that I am really, really excited about.
Great. Todd?
Yeah, I'll kind of build on that with maybe a couple concrete examples, just to give you a sense. So the idea of flying a drone or a little robotic aircraft back and forth over a farm field and taking pictures, that's a problem that is now solved. A technical problem is solved. That's easy to do. We do that all day, every day. That's easy. And so the new things are, what do you do with the information? How do you create value for the grower ultimately? Because that's who's paying for the thing at the end of the day. So it might be the farmer or the crop consultant or the agronomist or somewhere in the value chain at the farm. They're going to need this information to make better decisions. Just flying the drone isn't enough to get the information. You need to get the pictures and you need to do some analysis. So one really simple example that actually gets me really excited is this idea. It's called stand count. So I'm not sure who here grew up on a farm or knows what stand count is, but what it is you go out into a farm field after you've planted and the plants are starting to come up out of the ground, and you count how many plants are quote unquote standing up. How many plants are standing? How many plants emerged from the ground? Because you might have planted, a realistic number might be 30,000 corn seeds in an acre. So 30,000 individual seeds you planted on a perfectly straight rows in 1 acre on your field. The field might be 100 acres big or 160 acres big, but each acre's got 30,000 in it, and on average, you're not going to go count. A human would never be able to go count all those plants. So you go do a statistical sample. You take a tape measure. You go out 20 feet on a tape measure on the ground, and you count how many plants came up out of the ground. And it might be, you might count 23 plants along that length. And then you go back to your calculator in your truck and you do a little formula and you try to extrapolate that out to how many plants are growing in the whole field. So you might measure that 3 different spots in this field. And if you're driving across Minnesota and you're looking out the window and you're looking at these farm fields, they're huge. So just measuring 3 different spots, it might take you 10 minutes at each spot to go do that. So it takes you a half hour, and you've taken 3 counts, and you extrapolate to that the whole field, and that's your estimate for how well your seeds are growing this year, right? How many came up out of the ground. So you're doing that in the spring. You're doing that when it's muddy. So you're putting these big knee-high boots on, and you're tromping out in the middle of the field, and you're slipping on the mud, and you fall down, and you get all muddy. And it's miserable work, but this is the way it's been done for, decades or, centuries, right? This is what they do. With drones, and we have a product, Sentera, we've developed a product that does this today. You can take the drone, and instead of you putting on your boots and flying out there, you put the battery in the drone and draw a little box around your field and hit go, and it goes out there and it flies over the field back and forth and takes pictures of all those little plants. And then we take those pictures, run them into the software. The software identifies the rows. It finds this is a row of plants. This isn't some random plant that happens to be growing there as a weed or something like that. This is a straight row, and I'm going to count along it, and it counts all the plants. And so it's literally thousands of times more, it's hundreds of thousands of times more measurements that we're taking over the entire field, because the drone can fly all the way across to the far side and come back and fly on a big grid. So we are replacing something they're doing today with something that takes about the same amount of time, their same expense out the door in terms of the time of the employee or the person to go do that. They're not, except they didn't have to buy the big rubber boots this time. But in a half hour they can get that data, but the quality of the data is just way, way better, thousands and thousands of times better quality data in terms of how much is growing in that field. So how many people here realize that, that 90% of tractors on big farm fields are totally autonomous now? They're driven by GPS, and the farmers there drive it along for the ride, but he or she is not touching the wheel. They just, sometimes they are, but they're not very often. And they call it RTK GPS technology, or auto steer is another term for it. That took about 10 years to go from 10% adoption to 90% adoption, and that happened in the previous decade. So in the 2000s. And so now it's ubiquitous. 90% of big farms are using these self-driving tractors and all sorts of super high-tech stuff. They were driving tractors before then, so my firm belief is that in 10 years, 90% of people are going to be counting the plants in their field with drones. It's just going to be, there's no better way to do it. So it's really exciting to me. It's like, this is a super concrete, like, there's no doubt in my mind that there's an alternate way to do this or some other better way. This is the way it's going to be done, and it's going to be done in every farm field across the entire country, across the entire world. So it's cool.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Derek?
Yeah, so somewhat related to that, is you're developing new techniques, new analytical methods and so on, building on what you've already established so far. But going back to your genesis, right, and your early growth, what is the core IP that drew the funding? And if it isn't something tangible, like a specific algorithm, a specific data processing treatment, would you argue that it's the methodology that you're packaging together? What is it that brought that investment?
Question was about the core IP for the company.
Yeah, so without getting into all the details of how we started, but we were able to acquire some existing intellectual property, some existing designs for specific cameras and sensors that looked at different wavelengths of light. So like hardware based that we had, and the software that runs inside the hardware that we had developed at a previous company. And so we had the opportunity to, the same engineering team and the same smarts and the same people who developed that could take that product and basically commercialize it with a new company and for new applications. So that was the, sort of to answer your question directly, that was part of what.
Imaging technology, essentially, right, and then the processing around that?
Yeah, so that'd be the basic intellectual property that kind of started at the beginning. But we also obviously had the plan and the vision on how to go take that and implement it in a full system.
So what came to getting your investment from your first big tranche, and beyond Angel, is that I work in this other sort of technology companies, and you keep coming back to this question of what is the IP and how protected is it and how distinct is it? And when I hear a company story like this, and I'm sorry I don't know as much about you as I will on Monday, what is the thing that really gave people the assurance that they're investing something different? And there's a lot of companies. Right, what's your secret sauce? And I don't mean to reveal it here. I'm trying to get at what role did it play or not, right, in your start.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core camera technologies is a big part of it, and then the process of taking what is otherwise just a picture and turning that into a meaningful measurement that has actual economic value to a grower. I mean, that's really the core idea.
Would you call that a trade secret then for you, or you don't patent that, right?
I don't know. Is that some patent?
There's some patents and there's a lot of trade secrets, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a mix. I mean, you have to look at it kind of holistically and you know,
Accurately quantify and bound and measure these things, and it goes into your asset,
right.
storage locker.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe this is another way. You kind of made the comment that there's a lot of drone companies out there and the rest, and I'm kind of fascinated by this. They call it the Gartner hype cycle or the Gartner hype curve. This whole anytime there's a new technology, it was drones, it was Internet of Things, it was everything you can imagine. Some new hype, 3D TVs or whatever. Tons of hype around it, and everybody and it, hype, and you get up here and you've got this what they call the peak of inflated expectations, and then there's a big crash where all the inflated expectations, like the bubble bursts, and everybody realizes that it's not going to live up to the hype, and they have this thing they call it the trough of disillusionment, and then there's this, then it kind of it starts to grow again, the curve, and they call this, and it grows up to a little plateau that's not as high as the peak of inflated expectations, but they call it the plateau of productivity.
Kind of like aging.
Yeah, very good. So, yeah, exactly. So when we started Centera, there's lots of drone companies, and this was the peak of inflated expectations. Tons of drone companies start up, getting tons of money, just silly amounts of money for just an idea. And we were sitting there, we've been doing this for 12 years. We know what we're doing. We've made all the mistakes already. These guys aren't. What are we trying to do? We're trying to focus on the implementation, the productivity piece of it, like a specific. We're not trying to make drones for fun. And in fact, we're not even trying to make drones so much. We're trying to make a system that happens to utilize drones, but happens to utilize a lot of other things as well, image processing, algorithms, the core sensor technology itself. How do you put that into a package that then is easy to use and all that? So we're really focused out on the right-hand side, like the productivity piece, and we felt we had a head start to get in there than what a lot of the rest. But there's a lot of headwinds we have to fight looking for, trying to raise money, because there's so many of the boom-bust stories in the drone industry. So we have to prove how we're different, right?
Yeah, so we're a little past time, but I could tell by everybody's faces, they were interested in the story, so I kind of let it run a little bit. We have the room as long as anybody wants to stay. The guys will stay a little bit longer. To wrap up, question, that I have here that we hadn't gotten to, but you hear about, Amazon and home delivery with drones and stuff. So as you fast forward, not so, you can include Centera in that if you want, but as you look forward 5 or 10 years from now, what do you think the drone universe is looking like and what's happening?
You want to take that one?
Short answer.
So the short answer is, for whatever reason, part of my personality is I'm sometimes pessimistic about all this new stuff that's coming out. And so they drones in agriculture, nah, it's never going to happen. But yeah, this was me 10 years ago, and then now here we are, I'm doing it. Every time I've said that, every time somebody has come up with a crazy idea with drones, and I've said, that's never going to happen, and here's all the reasons why, 2 years later, I find out I was wrong. And so Amazon delivery, same thing. I was like, this is the dumbest idea ever. That's never going to happen. Amazon is, Jeff Bezos has said he's committed to spending $1 billion in it, right? So you can't ignore that. That's an awful lot of money to invest. And you look at what people are doing in other places, it's actually working. It's getting traction. It's not the way that you saw on the 60 Minutes show 2 years ago that talked about drone delivery, but they're finding practical ways to make it work. So the sky's the limit. I think this idea of like drone taxis, the idea of you get into a big drone and you fly from one skyscraper to the next. 2 years ago, I was like, that's the dumbest idea ever. I'm a firm believer that will happen, I think, before autonomous cars are common. So anyway, that's where I think it's going.
Yeah, I agree with that. There was, Dubai is using drone motorcycles or something, right? Or something like that. Yeah, I mean, higher levels of automation, right? Right now, if you're going to stand up anything to do with the drone business, that immediately thrusts you way into the weeds of flight controllers and, integration of sensors and all this other stuff that is not related to the core business at hand, be it delivering drones or taking pictures, for agricultural applications. And so this industry has and will continue to elevate out of the weeds of being a drone and being a vehicle to accomplish something. Actually, back at the Lockheed days, there was an engineer who would always tell me, like, the UAV is just a truck. It's just a truck. And I was like, you're wrong. I totally disagree with that. I'm an aero engineer. It's not fair. He's like, okay, 15 years later, I'm ready to admit he was right. But it's true. But we still spend so much time focusing on the truck. And it's like, I more care about the cargo. And that evolution will continue. Even the FAA has modernized in their approach to this. Now, if anybody wants to go start a business to fly drones, you take a test and you pay your $150 and you get a little card you can put in your wallet. So when the police come ask you what you're doing, you can say, I'm legal. Even 2 years ago, it was a massive bureaucratic nightmare. I went through it to get a certification to legally fly a drone. And so that is going to accelerate the adoption of these technologies too, as the legislative environment improves.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that about kind of looking forward. You think of PCs in the early 80s and software coming behind the drones or the PCs, and the software is just starting to come.
that's very true.
All right, so happy holidays to everybody. Have a great holiday season. Best of luck into the new year. We got lots of stuff at Club E. Go to clube.com to learn more, and thank you very much to our panelists.